Chosen one, stop scrolling. What you're feeling right now is not random, but it's also not what you think. Because if you're honest, something has been building lately. Not just stress, not just tiredness, but a kind of internal pressure you can't fully explain. Your emotions feel louder than usual. Small things hit harder. Your thoughts don't slow down the way they used to. And there are moments, quiet, private moments, where it feels like something inside you is slipping out of control. And that's the part that scares you. Not the situation, but the feeling that you're not as stable as you used to be. Like something is breaking. Like maybe you've reached your limit. But listen carefully, because this is where most people misunderstand what's happening to them. This is not your life collapsing. This is your old identity losing control. You're not falling apart. You're being exposed. Not in a way that shames you, but in a way that reveals what can no longer stay hidden. The way you used to think. The way you used to cope. The patterns you built just to survive. Under pressure, all of it starts to surface. And it feels chaotic, but it's actually precise. Because pressure doesn't create something new, it reveals what was already there. That's why this feels so intense. You're not just dealing with external stress. You're confronting internal misalignment. Parts of you that used to work don't work anymore. Reactions that used to protect you now drain you. And the more you try to hold everything together the way you used to, the heavier it feels. Because you're trying to keep a version of yourself that your next season cannot carry. This is the shift most people resist. They think the goal is to stabilize everything as fast as possible, to get back to normal. But what if normal is exactly what can't go with you anymore? What if this pressure is not trying to destroy your life, but to separate you from the version of you that was built for a smaller reality? Meltdown is not failure. It's exposure. It's the moment where what's misaligned becomes too obvious to ignore. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Because the more you try to force yourself back into who you were, the more resistance you feel. The more you try to control everything, the more it slips. But something interesting happens when you stop fighting it. Not giving up, but letting go of the need to hold everything the same. Clarity begins to appear. Not all at once, but enough to see differently. Enough to realize that maybe this isn't chaos. Maybe this is construction. This is not about losing everything. This is about becoming someone who can finally handle what's coming. If you stay with this long enough, you begin to notice a pattern. Not just in your life, but all throughout Scripture. God does not expand someone's life before He expands their capacity. He doesn't hand you something bigger and hope you grow into it later. He forms you first, then releases you into what you can actually carry without breaking. That's why these meltdown seasons exist. Not as punishment, not as abandonment, but as preparation that feels uncomfortable because it is reshaping you at a level you cannot fake. Look at Joseph. People often focus on the palace, the authority, the influence, but they forget the pressure that came before it. Betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, wrongly accused, forgotten in prison. That wasn't just suffering, it was formation. Because leadership without internal stability becomes destruction. If Joseph had been elevated too early, his wounds would have controlled his decisions. His bitterness would have shaped his authority. So God allowed pressure to build something inside him that position alone could never create. David followed a similar pattern. Anointed as king, but then hidden, serving in obscurity, fighting battles no one saw, learning restraint when he had the chance to take the throne early, but chose not to. That hidden tension built a kind of stability that public success demands. Because anyone can rise quickly. Not everyone can remain steady once they get there. Even Jesus, before stepping into ministry, was led into the wilderness. Not into comfort, not into visibility, into isolation, testing, and clarity. Because purpose without clarity becomes confusion. And calling without grounding becomes collapse. So when you look at your own life through that lens, something starts to make sense. These intense seasons are not random disruptions. They are consistent with how God prepares people for anything that carries weight. There are reasons for this. and they are deeper than most people are willing to face. First, these seasons expose internal instability. Not to shame you, but to show you what cannot carry what's coming. You can't build a life of influence on a foundation that cracks under pressure. You can't hold peace externally if internally you are still reactive, fragile, or dependent on circumstances. So pressure reveals where you still break, where you still depend on the wrong things, where your identity is not yet stable. And once you see it clearly, you can no longer pretend it's not there. Second, these seasons detach you from a survival identity. For a long time, you learned how to survive. You learned how to push, how to endure, how to function under stress. And that version of you served a purpose. It got you through difficult seasons, but it was never meant to be permanent. Because survival mode cannot carry expansion. The mindset that says just get through this cannot handle a life that requires peace, clarity, and intentional living. So God begins to disrupt that identity. Not because it was wrong, but because it is no longer enough. And that's where it feels confusing. Because what used to work stops working. The way you used to think doesn't feel right anymore. The way you used to react feels exhausting. And it leaves you in between versions of yourself. Not who you were, but not fully who you're becoming yet. Third, these seasons increase capacity, not comfort. This is where many people get it wrong. They expect that when something good is coming, life should feel easier first. But God doesn't build comfort before expansion. He builds strength, emotional strength, mental clarity, spiritual discernment, the ability to stay grounded when things are unstable. Because what's coming will not just require excitement, it will require stability. And here's the part that shifts everything if you really understand it. Breakthrough is not coming to save you. It's not arriving to fix you, complete you, or suddenly make everything easier. Breakthrough comes when you are no longer dependent on it to feel okay. When you can stand without it, then you can carry it. That's why these seasons feel intense. Because they are removing your dependency on outcomes. They are teaching you how to be steady before anything changes externally. So if everything feels heavy right now, if your emotions feel louder, if your inner world feels like it's being rearranged, don't rush to label it as something going wrong. Don't assume you're off track just because it's uncomfortable. It may not be punishment. It may be preparation for something that requires more from you than you've ever had to carry before. If you're still here, then something in you recognizes this isn't just theory. It feels familiar. Not because someone told you, but because you've been living it. And this is where we need to make it real. Not abstract, not spiritualized in a vague way, but clear enough that you can look at your own life and say, this is exactly what's been happening to me. Because this meltdown has patterns. And once you see them clearly, you stop mislabeling your own growth as dysfunction. The first sign is emotional overload. You feel more than you used to. Things that didn't affect you before now hit deeper. You notice shifts in people, in energy, in conversations. Your reactions feel closer to the surface. And it's easy to judge yourself for that. To think you've become unstable, too sensitive, too reactive. But what if the issue is not weakness? It's awareness. When your awareness increases, your tolerance for what is misaligned decreases. You can no longer ignore what drains you. You can no longer numb what feels off. And because you're not used to operating at that level of awareness, yet, it feels like overload. But it's not that you're breaking. It's that you're finally noticing. The second sign is a loss of interest in your old life. Things that used to matter don't carry the same weight anymore. Conversations feel shallow. Goals that once motivated you now feel empty. Even routines that once felt normal now feel forced. And this is one of the most confusing parts because it feels like you're losing direction, like you're becoming unmotivated. But that's not what's happening. You're transitioning phases. You're outgrowing a version of life that was built for who you used to be. And the problem is, you haven't fully stepped into what's next yet. So you're standing in between. No longer connected to the old, but not fully clear on the new. And that space feels empty if you don't understand it. But it's not emptiness. It's transition. The third sign is internal conflict. This is where things feel the most unstable. Part of you wants change. You can feel it. You know something different is needed. But another part of you resists. It wants familiarity. It wants safety. It wants what it understands, even if it no longer fits. So you feel pulled in two directions at the same time. You want to move forward, but you hesitate. You want clarity, but you overthink. You want growth, but you fear what it will cost. And this tension is not a problem to fix. This is where identity shift happens. This is where the old version of you is losing authority, and the new version hasn't fully taken over yet. Of course it feels unstable. You are literally changing at the level of how you think, how you respond, and what you're willing to accept. The fourth sign is something most people don't talk about, but it's one of the clearest indicators. You feel exhausted and clear at the same time. You're tired in a way that rest doesn't fully fix. But at the same time, you're starting to see things differently. Certain patterns are becoming obvious. Certain people, certain habits, certain cycles, you can't unsee them anymore. And that creates a strange paradox. You're drained, but more aware than ever. You're slower, but more precise. You're quieter, but internally sharper. That's transformation, because clarity requires energy. And when your mind and your identity are reorganizing at the same time, it's natural to feel both fatigue and awareness together. Now here's the twist that changes everything. Many people label this entire experience as a spiritual attack. They think something is wrong, something is against them, something is trying to pull them down. And while not everything is simple, this specific pattern is often not attack. It's internal reorganization. It's everything that was misaligned being brought to the surface, so it can no longer stay hidden inside you. It's your system, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, restructuring itself to match a higher level of clarity. And that doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels disruptive, because anything that is being rearranged will feel unstable before it becomes stable again. But this is the part you need to hear clearly. You are not losing yourself. You are losing what was never truly you. The reactions that came from fear. The patterns that came from survival. The identity that was shaped by limitation instead of truth. And of course that feels like loss, because you've been living through that version for so long. But what's leaving is not your core. It's what covered it. The real shift is not happening outside of you. Not in your circumstances, not in your environment, not yet. The real shift is happening in what you no longer tolerate being. You can't go back to thinking the same way. You can't ignore what you now see. You can't pretend certain things are okay when you know they're not. And that's how you know this is real. Because even if nothing outside changes immediately, you already have. Now the question becomes simple, but not easy. What do you do when everything inside you feels like too much? When your emotions are louder, your thoughts are faster, and your internal world feels like it's constantly shifting. This is where most people make a mistake. They try to fix everything immediately. They try to make decisions, take action, explain themselves, or regain control as fast as possible. But in a season like this, speed is not your advantage. Stability is. The first thing you need to do is slow down your reactions. Not your life completely, just your reactions. Because when emotions are at their peak, clarity is at its lowest. What you feel in those moments may be real, but it is not always accurate. If you react too quickly, you will make permanent decisions based on temporary intensity. So instead of responding immediately, you pause. You let the emotion pass through without turning it into action. You give yourself space between what you feel and what you do. That space is where maturity begins. The second thing is to reduce external noise. Not everyone around you will understand what you're going through. And if you're constantly absorbing other people's opinions, expectations, and interpretations, you will lose your own center. This is not the season to explain everything to everyone. It's not the season to seek validation from people who can only see your situation from the outside. Too many voices create confusion, and confusion leads to misalignment. So you become more selective, more quiet, not disconnected, but intentional about what you allow to influence your thinking. The third thing, and this is often overlooked, is to stabilize your body first. Because what you're experiencing is not only spiritual or emotional, it's physical too. Your nervous system is involved in everything you're feeling. If your body is overwhelmed, your mind will amplify it. So before you try to solve your life, you regulate your state. You rest when you need to rest. You slow your breathing. You step outside. You move your body. You drink water. These simple things may seem small, but they are foundational, because a regulated body creates space for a clear mind. And a clear mind allows you to see what is actually happening. The fourth thing is to stay anchored before seeking opinions. Most people reverse this. They go to others first, hoping someone will explain what they themselves don't yet understand. But that often leads to more confusion, because people will interpret your situation through their own experiences, fears, and limitations. Instead, you anchor yourself first. You sit with God before you speak to everyone else. You pray before you explain. You listen before you react. Because clarity doesn't come from noise, it comes from alignment. Scripture says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. And that last part is important. Self-control is not about suppressing what you feel. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about remaining steady while everything moves through you. It's the ability to hold your center even when your emotions are shifting. To not let every feeling dictate your direction. And that's the real strength in this season. Not fixing everything instantly. Not having all the answers right away. But staying grounded while things are being rearranged. Because the truth is, you don't need to fix everything right now. You don't need to solve your entire life in one moment. You don't need to force clarity before it's ready. You just need to not lose yourself while everything is shifting. And this is where everything comes together. Because if you've been listening closely, you can feel it. Something inside you is starting to settle. Not because everything is solved, but because you're beginning to understand what's actually happening. You are not falling apart. You are being restructured. What feels like chaos is not random. What feels like instability is not failure. It's a reordering, a realignment, a removal of what cannot carry where your life is going next. God is not removing you from your life. He is removing what no longer fits inside it. The patterns that kept you small. The reactions that kept you stuck. The identity that was built around survival instead of truth. And of course that process feels uncomfortable. Because anything being rebuilt has to be taken apart first. But that doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is finally being done right. Clarity will come. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for your next step. Peace will return. Not the kind that depends on everything being perfect, but the kind that stays even when things are still shifting. Direction will become clearer. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed yourself to see instead of react. And one day, you'll look back at this season, the one that felt the most confusing, the most intense, and realize it was the moment everything started to change. Not outside, inside. So if this message helped you see what you're going through a little more clearly, if something in you shifted from fear to understanding, from confusion to awareness, like this video as a way of choosing clarity over confusion. Subscribe to Chosen by God for messages that keep you grounded, not overwhelmed. And comment, I am becoming, not breaking. Because sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't look like progress. It looks like everything you thought you were, no longer holding together. You are not having a breakdown. You are finally seeing clearly enough to change.